Vámonos! Hey! Vámonos! Stay back! Take one more step! You and me, we are the same. Do it now, Karen! Do it now! Go like a soldier.
Frank Castle chases two bikers who have been causing trouble in the city. They fire at his car, but he evades the shots and takes them down. This reveals who he is, a former top U.S. Marine who now hunts criminals after the loss of his family. He walks away, ready for what comes next. This is The Punisher Season 1. Soon after, Frank heads to a building beside the gang leader's headquarters. His goal is to end the leader's life and stop the gang's crimes once and for all. From the rooftop, he takes aim and shoots the leader, who is inside enjoying himself with women. The focus then shifts to the gang leader's lawyer, who is inside a public restroom. He receives the shocking news that the leader has been killed. Determined to find the killer, he barely has time to react before Frank enters the room and attacks him. The lawyer demands to know who Frank is and why he is targeting him. Frank states plainly that he killed the leader and plans to kill him as well. The lawyer pleads for mercy, swearing he will never work for criminals again. Frank ignores his words and continues the beating without hesitation.
Get a room, you dirty bastards.
6 months later, Frank works as a construction laborer. He keeps to himself, avoids contact with others, and hides his past as a Marine. His only goal is to stay unnoticed. At night, he returns to his rented room to rest. In the morning, he wakes from a dream about his late wife and heads back to the construction site. After his shift, he sits on the rooftop, thinking about what lies ahead. A new worker named Max tries to start a conversation, but Frank cuts him off, saying he does not need friends.
Look, Donnie, thanks for the sandwich. I'm not looking for a pal, yeah?
Yeah.
Not long after, Frank meets Curtis, an old friend from the military. Curtis is shocked to see him alive, since Frank was reported dead. Frank explains that his death was staged to escape his enemies. Curtis accepts the truth, and before leaving, Frank warns him never to reveal his secret. Meanwhile, Max spends time drinking with other workers at a bar. Among them is William, a bald man frustrated with their low wages. William suggests robbing a mafia boss who often gambles in a nearby basement. The next day, he talks more about the plan at work. Frank overhears, but when William notices, he threatens to kill him if he speaks.
You need to mind your own business.
Frank does not take the threat seriously and walks away. As the robbery approaches, William recruits Max with the promise of a share in the money. Max, desperate for cash, agrees. That night, the group storms into the gambling den. They beat a guard, point their guns at the boss and his players, and force Max to collect the money. The mafia boss warns them that they are making a dangerous mistake, but William ignores him. During the chaos, Max nervously drops his wallet. His ID card falls out, revealing his name and address. The boss notices, ensuring he can find him later. Despite this, the group escapes with the money.
Move! Go move! Move!
Later, William turns on Max, furious that he exposed himself. He decides Max must die to protect the group. Max panics and runs up the building, but William and his men corner him. They throw him into a cement mixer, planning to erase all traces once the cement hardens. Max screams for help, but William shows no mercy. That night, Frank returns to the site for overtime work. When William sees him, he orders his men to throw Frank into the cement mixer along with Max unaware of who Frank really is. They attack, but Frank fights back.
Tonight just gets better and better.
Frank overpowers one of the men and throws him into the cement. He knocks William to the ground and demands to know what happened to Max. William begs for his life, but Frank kills him and pushes him into the mixer. Another man tries to escape, but Frank chases him down and takes him out. With the threat removed, Frank lowers a rope and rescues Max. Half an hour later, the mafia boss and his crew gather to hunt Max. Suddenly, the lights go out. Gunfire erupts in the darkness. When the lights return, every man is dead except the boss. Frank steps out, holding a gun. He killed them all to protect Max. Without hesitation, he shoots the boss and leaves the basement calmly before the police arrive. The next day, Frank quits his construction job and boards a boat to New York. He knows he must disappear after the bloodshed. On the deck, memories of his children surface. He recalls the times they rode with him to enjoy the view of New York. The memories fade quickly, reminding him of what he lost. When he arrives, Frank stops at a cafe for coffee. A waiter approaches and says there is a phone call for him. Frank refuses at first, since no one should know he is alive. But the waiter insists, explaining that the caller described him in detail. Frank finally answers. On the line, a mysterious man says he knows Frank is a former Marine. He claims to have sent a CD to Frank's house in New York. Although Frank does own a house there, it has been abandoned for years, and this is his first time returning. After hearing this, Frank pays for his drink and walks out. Outside, he notices a suspicious man and follows him up to a rooftop. There he finds only a phone and a note that reads, "Do not be disappointed." At the same time, the mysterious man is actually on the roof of the cafe Frank left behind. From there, he signals Frank to contact him using the phone he planted. That night, Frank sits in his house and plays the CD sent by the mysterious caller. On the screen, he sees footage of himself as a Marine torturing a prisoner. Shocked, he begins to question who this man is and how he obtained such evidence. The next day, Frank visits Curtis and tells him about the phone call, the CD, and the planted phone. Curtis advises him to contact their former informant, who might know more about the man's identity. Later, Frank disguises himself as a beggar. A woman gives him money, and he recognizes her as Karen, the informant. She is stunned to see him alive, believing he had died. Frank asks her to take him to her home. At her house, Frank warns Karen not to reveal his identity. He asks her to trace the mysterious phone and if she finds anything, to signal him by placing a flower pot on her window. After that, she should meet him at their usual spot. Karen agrees. The next day, Karen investigates the phone and finds a name, David Lieberman. She asks a colleague about him and learns that he was an NSA analyst and skilled hacker, officially reported dead after being shot by a police chief. With this information, Karen thanks her colleague and later meets Frank. She uses the flower pot signal as agreed. During their meeting, Karen explains that David Lieberman, also known as Micro, was accused of leaking U.S. military secrets before his supposed death a year ago. She hands Frank a file containing David's background. Frank thanks her and leaves.
Thanks for this.
The following day, Frank visits David's house. He deliberately bumps into David's wife's car, making her feel guilty. She takes him inside to treat his injuries. While inside, Frank asks about David. She insists her husband was killed a year earlier by the police chief. Frank listens politely but doubts her claim. In reality, David is alive and secretly watching Frank from a distance. He hides in a secret location, keeping even his wife unaware of his survival. Although worried about his family's safety after Frank approached their home, David believes Frank would never harm women or children. His true intention is not to fight Frank, but to recruit him as an ally. Meanwhile, Frank decides to change his appearance. After shaving his beard and cutting his hair, he heads to the house of the police chief, the man rumored to have shot David. As soon as he arrives, the chief launches an attack, and a brutal fight begins. Frank overpowers him and ties him to a chair. He demands to know why the chief shot David and whether David is truly dead. Instead of answering, the chief manages to grab a gun and points it at Frank. When he pulls off Frank's mask, he is stunned to recognize him as the former Marine. The gun turns out to be empty, giving Frank the chance to take control again.
Holy shit. You don't know how to die, do you?
Now close your eyes, Frank. Gun's empty, asshole.
Frank never intended to kill the chief, but once his identity is exposed, he has no choice. 2 hours later, The chief's death becomes headline news. A detective named Dina and her partner are assigned to the case. Dina believes the killer is highly trained because no evidence was left behind. The next day, Frank eats quietly in a cafe. David calls him and insists he is not an enemy. Frank refuses to believe him, warning that if David values his family, he should stay away. He tells David to meet him that night and explain everything. David agrees on the condition that his family is not harmed. That night, David follows his GPS to a cemetery, arriving at his own fake grave. He waits for Frank, but Frank never appears. Disappointed, David returns to his hideout, unaware that Frank is hidden in his car trunk. Once inside, Frank ambushes him and knocks him unconscious.
No.
David wakes up tied to a chair, panicked. He insists he is not a threat and only wants to work with Frank. Frank demands answers about David's past and how he knows so much about him. Suddenly, an alarm sounds. David explains he failed to enter his security code, and the place will explode in 3 minutes if it is not stopped. Frank frees one of his hands, allowing him to disable the system. Once the alarm is off, David explains everything. He says he was an NSA analyst assigned to Afghanistan, monitoring American troops, including Frank's unit. During that time, he uncovered evidence that Colonel Ray, Frank's commander, was secretly working with an Afghan general. Together, they used the war to hide weapons and drug deals. David tried to expose the truth, but once back in America, the police branded him a liar. The police chief even shot him, forcing him into hiding.
Don't move! This is a mistake! Alright? That's not true!
David!
This is a mistake!
His own family believed he was dead. David reveals that Colonel Ray cooperated with the police to silence him, and he shows Frank proof that Ray was also responsible for the murder of Frank's wife and children. This is why David reached out, hoping they could unite against their common enemy. The revelation triggers Frank's memories of his missions in Afghanistan under Colonel Ray, particularly the times he shared with his close friend Billy. In one of those missions, Colonel Ray ordered Frank, Billy, and their unit to raid a terrorist base.
I think this is a trap. I think it's a trap because it's exactly what I would do.
I trust Frank's instincts, sir.
A fierce gunfight followed, and although Frank and his men eliminated everyone inside, Ray scolded him afterward. The colonel had only wanted a raid, not a massacre. Frustrated and angry, Frank lashes out at Colonel Ray, leaving him blind in one eye. As a result, Frank is discharged from the military and sent to prison. While serving his sentence, he learns that his wife and children have been murdered. He later escapes and goes into hiding until the world believes he is dead. Convinced that Colonel Ray orchestrated his family's murder to take revenge for losing his eye, Frank makes him his ultimate target. From this point, Frank agrees to work with David, but only under one condition, that everyone involved must die. Together, they begin planning their mission. The next day, David uses his hacking skills to uncover information about an upcoming Greek mafia arms deal. He suspects the buyer is Colonel Ray. Frank and David decide to intercept the truck carrying the weapons before it reaches him. Meanwhile, Billy, Frank's former comrade, has become the leader of Anvil, a private military group created to support the army when manpower is low. The group is still new and lacks soldiers, so Billy is seen recruiting fresh members to build his ranks. At the same time, Detective Dina and her partner meet with senior police officials to discuss the murder of the police chief. Since the killer remains unidentified, the officials consider it a priority, but Dina urges them to delay the case. She explains that a far more urgent threat is unfolding, an arms deal involving the Greek mafia scheduled for that very night. Although her source has not revealed the buyer's identity, she insists they must act quickly. The officials agree and assign her to lead the raid. Meanwhile, Frank and David are already making their own preparations for the same deal. Planning to hijack the mafia's truck, David points out they will need a fast sports car to pull it off. Frank recalls a local gang that hoards stolen vehicles and knows exactly where to find one. At the gang's hideout, the members are torturing 2 people while several sports cars sit nearby. Frank walks in holding a grenade and warns them not to shoot. They ignore him and open fire, forcing Frank to retaliate.
You miss.
Outnumbered but relentless, he kills them all. Once the fight is over, he calls David, who has been waiting outside, and tells him to pick a car. David chooses a red one, and they leave together. With the car secured, they launch their mission. Frank's task is to take control of the truck, while David disrupts police response. Knowing Detective Dina is also targeting the mafia, David hacks into police communications, leaving the officers unable to coordinate.
Sniper 1.
Solo 1, can you read me?
Frank seizes the truck, rescues 2 hostages inside, and then switches vehicles with David. Confused by the blackout, the police fail to stop them. Soon after, another car gives chase. It is Detective Dina. Frank tries to evade her, but the pursuit continues until David rams her car with the truck, bringing it to a halt. Frank orders David to take the truck back to their base while he deals with Dina. He pulls her from her vehicle seconds before it explodes. Although she sees his face through her fading vision, he spares her life, telling her to stay out of his way. 2 days later, Dina wakes in the hospital. Her injuries are minor, and she is released the same day. Troubled by what she saw, she wonders if the man who saved her was Frank Castle, a Marine believed dead for years. Meanwhile, Frank and David examine the stolen weapons and talk about their next move. For now, they cannot act, since Colonel Ray's location is still unknown. The next day, Dina returns to duty, still unsettled by her suspicions about Frank's survival. Determined to uncover the truth, she tracks down Karen, Frank's trusted informant, and brings her to the station for questioning. Inside her office, Dina presses Karen directly about Frank, but Karen calmly insists he has been dead for years. No matter how Dina tries to corner her, Karen refuses to slip. Realizing she will get nothing more, Dina reluctantly lets her go. Afterward, Dina tells her partner she wants to investigate Frank further. Her partner grows frustrated, arguing that the issue is irrelevant compared to their failed mission against the Greek mafia. Dina follows him and explains that Frank saved her from the car explosion and warned her not to interfere. She believes that finding him will also reveal who the mafia was planning to trade weapons with. Her partner dismisses her theory and walks away. Meanwhile, Frank and David review the old military video showing Frank torturing a prisoner. In the footage, Frank spots his former comrade Gunnar. Realizing Gunnar may know where Colonel Ray is, Frank decides to visit him at his home deep in the forest. The scene shifts to Colonel Ray, who is now a CIA director. He learns that Frank is alive and responsible for hijacking the Greek mafia's weapon truck. In response, Ray orders mercenaries to hunt him down. Soon after, Frank and David head toward the forest. David waits in the car while Frank continues on foot. He approaches a house he believes belongs to Gunnar, only to be met by an arrow. Frank snaps it and shouts Gunnar's name. Gunnar lowers his bow, apologizing and explaining he thought Frank was an intruder. Shocked to see him alive, Gunnar listens as Frank explains he came only to ask about Colonel Ray. Before Gunnar can answer, mercenaries sent by Ray arrive and open fire. A battle breaks out. David launches a drone to guide Frank, while Ray monitors the fight from his laptop. Frank and Gunnar kill several attackers, but Gunnar is shot twice and collapses. They take cover behind a large rock as David warns them of 2 more enemies closing in. With his guidance, Frank eliminates the last soldiers. Frank addresses the enemy's body camera, vowing to hunt Colonel Ray. He tries to carry the wounded Gunnar to safety, but Gunnar refuses, insisting he wants to die in the forest. As Frank struggles against the poison from the arrow wound, his strength fades and he collapses. David rushes in, drags him to the car, and drives them out of the forest. When Frank finally regains consciousness, he finds himself in David's hideout, still badly wounded. The pain soon overwhelms him again, and he passes out, leaving David no choice but to seek help from Curtis, Frank's old friend. Curtis arrives and removes the arrow lodged in Frank's chest. Using his medical training from the military, he manages to treat the wound. Before leaving, David warns him not to reveal the hideout's location to anyone. An hour later, Frank regains consciousness and asks about Gunnar. David explains that Gunnar is dead and his body was left in the forest. Frank remains silent, troubled that Gunner died without revealing Colonel Ray's location. David urges him to rest, reminding him that his injuries are far from healed. Meanwhile, Detective Dina and her partner arrive at the forest crime scene. Dina suspects Gunner's death is linked to Frank. She collects a blood sample for further analysis. The next day, Dina meets Billy, Frank's former comrade. She asks if he knows Frank is alive. Billy is shocked, having believed Frank died years earlier. Curious, he presses for details. Dina explains that Frank saved her from a car explosion and that DNA from the blood sample confirms he survived. Stunned, Billy agrees to help Dina track him down. Later, Billy visits Curtis to talk about Frank. Curtis pretends to know nothing, though inside he feels relieved that Frank is still alive. Afterward, he heads to David's hideout and warns Frank that his secret is in danger. Dina and Billy now know the truth. Curtis suggests Frank meet Billy and ask him to keep quiet. The following day, Frank meets Billy at a dock. Billy is stunned yet overjoyed to see him alive. They embrace, and Billy expresses his sorrow for the loss of Frank's family. He explains that he now leads Anvil, a military-backed organization, and invites Frank to join, saying his skills would be invaluable. Frank refuses, making it clear that his only goal is to hunt Colonel Ray, the man responsible for his family's death. Billy accepts the answer and promises to keep Frank's survival a secret. Later that night, however, Billy secretly meets a man inside a car. The man is none other than Colonel Ray. It is revealed that Billy has been working with him all along, and he immediately betrays Frank by informing Ray that Frank is alive and looking for him. Ray, already aware of the situation, calmly states that he will strike first and hunt Frank. The next day, Frank trains at David's hideout. While exercising, he recalls that Ray once had a trusted right-hand man named Ben. Convinced that Ben knows Ray's location, Frank decides to interrogate him. He and David plan the mission, with Frank going inside Ben's house while David monitors from outside. Meanwhile, Billy visits Dina's office. Dina hopes he has information about Frank, but Billy lies and claims to know nothing. He keeps the truth hidden because if Dina finds Frank, Ray's crimes could be exposed. Back at Ben's house, Frank sneaks inside and catches Ben off guard, grabbing him by the neck. He beats him and demands Ray's address. Terrified, Ben gives it up. At the same moment, David warns Frank through the earpiece that 4 mercenaries are approaching. He tells Frank to leave, but Frank chooses to fight.
Ten more seconds, Frank.
3, 2.
Frank kills 3 of the attackers, but is shot by the last one. Injured, he escapes through a tunnel and encounters another soldier. Frank warns him to stand down, but the man aims his gun. Frank shoots first, then rushes to David's car, and they escape together. The following day, Ray, Billy, and Ben gather at Ray's house. Ben claims Frank attacked him but denies giving away the address. Billy escorts him to another room, where Ben finds his girlfriend lying dead. Realizing what is coming, he panics. Under Ray's orders, Billy stabs him to death, knowing he betrayed them. Meanwhile, Frank positions himself outside Ray's house with a sniper rifle. When Ray approaches the window, Frank fires, but the bullet fails to pierce the reinforced glass. Alarms blare, lights flood the area, and Frank narrowly escapes. The following day, David hacks into CIA files and discovers the reason behind Ray's untouchable status. To their shock, Frank and David learn that Ray has risen to become the head of the CIA, which explains why every attempt to reach him has failed. Meanwhile, Colonel Ray meets Billy and orders him to kill Frank. He warns that leaving Frank alive will put them all in danger. Billy admits he cannot face Frank alone, so Ray instructs him to use Anvil soldiers for the mission. At the same time, David drinks heavily and suggests that Frank work with Detective Dina. Frank refuses, insisting he cannot risk exposing the truth that he is still alive. Later, Billy gathers 4 of Anvil's best men. He offers them large sums of money for a secret mission to hunt Frank and tells them he will lead the mission himself. They agree. The next day, Billy and his team storm what they believe to be Frank's hideout. Instead, they mistakenly attack Detective Dina's shooting range. A fierce gunfight breaks out between Billy's squad and Dina's unit. Outnumbered, Billy's men are all killed, leaving only him. He attempts to escape but is cornered by Dina's partner. When his mask is removed, Billy stabs the officer to death and flees. Moments later, Dina arrives and finds her partner dead. She collapses in grief. 2 days later, Frank and David watch from a rooftop as they follow a man they suspect is connected to Ray. Suddenly, a nearby building erupts in an explosion. The bomber is revealed to be a teenager named Lewis. He later writes a letter threatening the US police, blaming them for imprisoning his father, whom he believes was innocent. That evening, Curtis visits his neighbor's house after noticing he has not been seen in days. Inside, he finds the man dead. Lewis steps out from the shadows, revealing himself as the killer. Curtis demands to know who he is and why he is there, but Lewis attacks without answering. Skilled in combat, he quickly overpowers Curtis. Meanwhile, Frank and David continue tracking the bombing suspect. David identifies the attacker as Lewis and uncovers several possible addresses. As Frank rushes out, David calls to redirect him, explaining that Curtis has asked for help at his neighbor's house. Trusting Curtis's request, Frank changes course and heads there. When he arrives, he is horrified to find Curtis beaten and strapped to a bomb. He gives him water and asks if Lewis is responsible. Curtis confirms but does not know where Lewis is hiding. Suddenly, the phone attached to the bomb rings. Frank answers, and Lewis speaks from a distance, watching him. Frank demands to know why Lewis is doing this. Lewis claims he is like Frank, fighting for justice in his own way. Frank rejects the comparison, telling him they are nothing alike. Frank says he never harms innocents, while Lewis takes hostages, which is the act of a coward. Uneasy, Lewis hangs up. 5 minutes later, Lewis calls again. This time, he says he wants to work with Frank. Frank refuses, saying he will never side with a terrorist. He even challenges Lewis to detonate the bomb, reminding him that both he and Curtis are Marines who are not afraid to die. Shaken, Lewis loses confidence and instructs Frank to cut the white wire. Frank does so quickly, disarming the bomb and saving Curtis. Moments later, the police arrive. Frank slips away but is cornered by one officer. He fights back, steals the officer's car, and escapes. Meanwhile, David meets Dina in a cafe. He tells her that Colonel Ray, now head of the CIA, is corrupt. Ray works with the mafia, trafficking weapons and drugs, and he was the one responsible for murdering Frank's family. While they talk, breaking news shows Frank's face on television. He was caught on camera during his escape. Now the police know he is alive. The next day, Lewis disguises himself as an Anvil employee and sneaks into their office with a bomb. He plants it near the room where Karen is interviewing a senator. He detonates the device, killing several people. Karen survives, but Lewis storms in, shoots the others, and takes her hostage. Frank arrives soon after but cannot act because Lewis threatens to kill Karen and blow himself up. Lewis drags her away, threatening Anvil guards who hesitate to stop him. They let him leave. Frank tries to follow using another route but is intercepted by Dina, who aims her gun at him. He tells her to lower her weapon, insisting he is not the enemy and that he is chasing Lewis to save Karen. Dina refuses and orders him to surrender. Frank steps closer, telling her to shoot if she does not believe him. Before either can act, Billy suddenly opens fire. The ambush forces them to scatter, and Frank escapes in another direction. Now certain that Billy has betrayed him and joined Colonel Ray, Frank pushes on toward Lewis. Lewis grows frustrated as he searches for an escape. Frank approaches and tries to calm him, offering to work together if he releases Karen. The offer is only a distraction, since Karen is secretly cutting the white wire on Lewis's bomb vest. Once she finishes, Frank closes in and Karen breaks free. Lewis then locks himself inside a small room, reconnects the wire, and triggers a massive explosion that kills him.
Karen, get out of here.
Frank?
Karen, you go now.
Hell no, come on!
Go like a soldier.
Frank now has to escape the Anvil building. He pretends to hold Karen hostage inside an elevator so the police will not interfere. Once inside, he climbs through the top hatch and slips away. Before leaving, he warns Karen to stay safe, and they part ways. Hours later, Frank returns to David's hideout and tends to his wounds. David explains that he has already met Dina and told her about Colonel Ray's crimes. Frank adds that their enemies now include not only Ray but also Billy, who has sided with him. Meanwhile, David's wife and children are at home when a police officer arrives. He is secretly one of Ray's men and tries to kidnap them. She resists, but another officer takes her son hostage. They capture her and the boy, while David's daughter manages to escape through the back door. David discovers the kidnapping through his home CCTV feed. Frank urges him to stay calm, pointing out that the men are working for Ray. They also notice on the footage that David's daughter escaped. Frank contacts her and tells her where to hide. He then sends David to pick her up and deliver her to Dina for protection. At the same time, Ray and Billy hold David's wife and son in a warehouse. They announce that the hostages will only be released if Frank and David surrender. Before Frank can act, Ray's men attack the hideout. Frank fights back and kills them all, leaving one survivor. He interrogates the man about David's family, but the captive insists he knows nothing. Frank executes him and takes his phone. Frank calls Billy and tells him he is disappointed that he chose to side with Colonel Ray. Billy admits he did it for money and power, then proposes a trade, David and Frank in exchange for David's wife and son. Frank accepts, and they arrange to meet the following afternoon. The next day, Frank and David arrive at the exchange site. Frank warns David to remain calm no matter what Billy says. Soon, a car pulls up with David's wife and son, while Billy takes position on a rooftop with a sniper rifle. Billy calls and orders them to walk toward the car. They comply. David's family is released and walks away, but Frank is captured by Billy's men. When they try to seize David as well, Dina and her team suddenly arrive. A gunfight erupts. David is shot, while Frank is taken away by Billy's soldiers. Hours later, Frank is held inside David's hideout, now under Billy's control. Billy accuses him of breaking their agreement by calling Dina's forces. Frank denies it, suggesting David may have been the one who contacted her. He then asks Billy if he was involved in the murder of his wife and children. Billy admits he was, saying the money offered was too great to refuse. At Dina's office, David is revealed to be alive thanks to a bulletproof vest. He reunites with his wife and children, who are unharmed. Meanwhile, Colonel Ray arrives at the hideout and tortures Frank brutally. During the beating, David's computer alarm sounds because the security code was not entered. Billy unties one of Frank's hands and orders him to stop it. Frank complies, but in the process he secretly grabs a knife and stabs Ray in the shoulder. Before he can finish the job, Ray recovers and holds him back, allowing Ray to continue. Ray beats Frank mercilessly and prepares to gouge out his eyes. Frank finally manages to free himself and attacks Ray with all his strength, leaving him badly beaten. Drained and bleeding, Frank collapses. Billy tries to finish him off, but David and Dina's team arrive just in time. Dina shoots Billy, but he escapes. David rushes to help Frank. 30 minutes later, Frank is taken to a doctor and survives after treatment. Over the following days, he slowly recovers with David and Dina by his side. Once healed, he thanks them both. Dina tells him he can now live freely, but Frank says he still has unfinished business with Billy. He asks for her permission to go after him. Aware of how dangerous Billy is, Dina agrees. Meanwhile, Curtis wakes at home to find Billy aiming a gun at him. Curtis insists they have no conflict and offers to make coffee so they can talk. Billy keeps his weapon raised and demands to know why Curtis never told him Frank was alive. Curtis hands him the coffee. Suddenly, a shot rings out. Frank had been aiming at Billy but misses, hitting Curtis in the shoulder instead. Frank calls Curtis's phone and demands to speak with Billy, challenging him to meet that night and finish things once and for all. Billy agrees, and the stage is set. That night, they face each other at the agreed location, both ready for the inevitable fight. Before it begins, Dina, who has been tracking Frank's movements, arrives at the scene. Frank fires first, and the battle between the two former Marines erupts. The fight is intense. Dina tries to step in and help Frank, but Billy shoots her, and she collapses. Frank and Billy then continue in a brutal hand-to-hand struggle. In the end, Frank chooses not to kill him. Instead, he disfigures Billy's face, ensuring he will suffer for the rest of his life. After the fight, Frank rushes Dina to the hospital. 2 days later, she regains consciousness and begins her recovery. Around the same time, the CIA director visits Frank and presents him with an award for exposing Colonel Ray's corruption. The following day, David reunites with his wife and children. They can finally live openly, no longer forced to hide or pretend he is dead. Meanwhile, Frank visits Curtis. He tells him about his plan to form a new organization dedicated to fighting crime and protecting the innocent. To be continued. So the moral of the story is never drop your wallet during a robbery, unless you really want free home delivery from the mafia.